Okay, so let's get started. I'll quickly introduce myself. So I'm Emma Ganley, Director of Strategic Initiatives at protocols.io, and have previously worked a lot in publishing. My role before joining protocols.io was Chief Editor at PLOS Biology. So I've thought a lot about open access to data, access to methods, and about how all of these things function, if you will, as research objects that are important for researchers. So we will get started today. So focus of the presentation is about incentives for sharing experimental methods in protocols.io or in any other outlet or repository. But here's just a couple of quick housekeeping points before we begin. So as you know, I've just started the webinar recording. You'll all get a link. There will be time for Q&A at the end, but if you think of a question during the webinar, feel free to pop it either in the Q&A or the chat. I'll try, if I spot them when they come in and they're relevant, I'll try and answer them then and there. If not, I'll come to them at the end. And also say we'll be sharing the slides, but there's linked to other webinars, but also if you wanted to use the platform, you can sign up for a demo at any time. There are lots of one-to-one slots. Okay, so quick agenda of what we will cover today. We will introduce methods development in the 21st century. Also talk a little bit about public sharing of and getting credit for reproducible and discoverable protocols on protocols.io. And so exactly what that kind of means for researchers, how that benefits research in general. And then how this can improve the reliability and impact of the research papers that you're publishing. You turn your protocols into peer-reviewed papers. And finally, some Q&A at the end. So with that, we will get started on a little bit of just background about methods development and how that's changed in the last, let's say, 20 years. So if we go back a little bit in history, the journal Nature Methods was launched in 2004. So just under 20 years. The excerpt that you see here is from the inaugural editorial. The founding editors stated that their goal was to create a highly visible forum for the presentation of novel methods because major methodological developments take their roots in the cross-fertilization of different disciplines. As a contrast to this, the normal way of communicating methods, the little method sections of journal articles, although they are somewhat useful for the targeted peer groups, they generally don't have enough technical information or specifics of the how of all of a technique or approach that was taken that's needed to move more towards interdisciplinary exchanges. So what you find in materials of methods is often not very helpful for being able to actually see and understand what they did and reproduce perhaps what they did. So that's Nature Methods, launched in 2004. The eagle-eyed of you will have seen Springer Nature, a logo on my first slide. So protocols.io was recently acquired by Springer Nature, and there's a nice kind of synchrony really in that they have been a location that has been very focused, Springer Nature, on making methods available over time, and they have the biggest already collection of different resources around methods and protocols. So I'll have a great example of an interdisciplinary success story via methods a bit later on, but behind the scenes from that Nature Methods inaugural editorial, what we learned from that founding editor-in-chief, Veronique Kierma, she is now the Chief Scientific Officer at the Public Library of Science. We learned from her that there was a lot of skepticism, even in Nature Publishing Group, around the launch of Nature Methods. They weren't convinced that it was a good idea to create a venue for methods. They thought that researchers publish research and nobody would be interested in a journal that just published methods. So that they had a genuine concern that it might dilute the brand and it would be impossible to fill a journal's pages with just methods. They didn't think there would be enough content and that people would find it interesting. As we all know now, Nature Methods has been a huge thriving success. It's interesting to think back there to that skepticism that existed just under 20 years ago, or around 20 years ago, I guess, when they were conceiving and putting together Nature Methods. A lot has happened since then. So if we look more recently in the last 10 years, there's more and more methods focused journals, published protocols and methods there's some examples on the slide, but it's not exhausted. And Springer Nature, as I mentioned, they continue to expand their portfolio of method center journals like Nature Protocols 2 years after they launched Nature Methods, and they have Protocols Exchange. But Elsevier also launched our protocols and Methods X, and there's lots of other independent initiatives like Jove or Bioprotocols and others. So we're starting to see more recognition of this sharing of methods. I don't think it's been perceived by the community as something important to share, though. So in the 90s and noughties, started to move away from contact authors for code and data to here are lots of specialized data and code repositories like GitHub, Dryad, Figshare, Open Science Framework, and data availability statements started to be commonplace in many journals. That really happened after the PLOS policy was implemented in 2014. So we're now in a place where journals, funders, and lots of researchers have realized that it's not just code and data we should be sharing, and methods are playing catch up. So sharing the methods is becoming the norm, and you've got now a lot more choices of where to communicate those methods. But I will move on now to give you insights into how you can use protocols.io for public sharing and getting credit for reproducible, discoverable protocols on protocols.io. So as I mentioned earlier, there's lots of different research outputs, and we've been accommodating the sharing of some for some time. Most well recognized in the center here is the research article, but we also appreciate more and more value of code and data. Citations are an important element, and they get shared independently too. But last but not least, definitely methods. In fact, the methods are really the linchpin to reuse and ongoing value of all the other items that you have here. And so why do I think methods are so important? Well, so trying to give you an example or just a comparison really, or to try and help you think about this. Here is an image that I found in an article where someone had made a variety of tiny tweaks to one cookie recipe. So as you can see, if the cookies here are your data and your results from those methodological tweaks, they are phenotypically very, very different from one another. So they, you know, some are bigger, some have spread out more, some look more brittle, some look softer. Scientifically, though, we can only understand those phenotypic differences if we have a knowledge of what the methodological tweaks were that we used to generate each different kind of cookie. So in short, you need to know the tweak, what was different in the method for every cookie to be able to actually analyze, interpret, and understand the resulting data. So if we share the data, but we don't have the methods, that's a bit bizarre. We don't really know what to make of it. We've just got lots of different cookies, but we don't know why they're like they are and why some taste better and some taste horrible. That's a screenshot from a magazine, anyway, that image that I stole. And this is where protocols.io comes in. So our mission's really simple for researchers. We want to make it easy to share method details before, during, and after publication. So with a platform like protocols.io, you can capture every single run that you make of an experiment with any tweaks that you make to it every single time. And then you'll know exactly what the method was when it comes to publication time, and can make that available very, very easily with a few clicks, which I'll show you in a bit. It's well known as an open access repository too, so I'll give you a little bit of an insight how you can use that. So if you are not familiar, please take a look at the URL here on the bottom left. Many people know that protocols.io is an open access repository. Well over 16,000 published protocols that are now on the platform, discoverable because they're all published with an open CC by Creative Commons license. So they're free to read, use, and reuse. And it's also free to create an account and publish protocols on the protocols.io repository. In addition to those 16,000 published protocols, though, there's also a lot of private content. So over 65,000 private protocols created by users who are generating, optimizing, collaborating, sharing with immediate colleagues the protocols that they use in their daily work research. And so the business model for us is that we charge institutions for these private collaborative workspaces, so for more private content. So can come along, have a limited number of private files and publish for free. But if you want to be able to do lots of private development, you will need to pay, or hope that your institution has a license that will allow you to have take advantage of unlimited private space. But for the public protocols, every year about 1 million people come to the repository to read those public protocols. That's increasing as we have more and more content. So those protocols that have been shared, they're indexed in a few different places, Crossref, Google Scholar. They appear on your ORCID profile if you've published one, and if you've linked up to your ORCID profile, they'll appear as a work on that profile. So in this way, all of those published protocols are a useful and valuable research output, can allow for researchers to receive credit for them. About 60% of all traffic to our public protocols comes from Google searches, where people are just organically looking for a method, a way to do something. And they find these amazing protocols that have been made available on protocols.io, but which can then be attributed back to the people who created the protocols. Geographically, when we look at our own analytics, about 30% of the traffic comes from the United States, the rest's from all over the world. So there's really a global reach to the sharing of the public protocols on the platform. So if you come to protocols.io and just want to have a look around, if you're not ready to make content yet, but you want to have a search, when you land on that welcome page, there's a search bar right there. So you can pop in your experimental approach of choice or method of choice, whatever it is, or some kind of specific research area you're interested in. And you can search for protocols on the platform. Publications are all of the made available public protocols. You can also search for people though, workspaces, other content on the platform that might be available this way. When you find them, if you do have an account, if there's a protocol that you want to use in your lab, you can use someone else's, either directly run their protocol and save a run record, or if you know it's going to work for you, but you might need to make a few tweaks, you can create a fork. So their protocol exists, they can be making new versions. You can make a fork and create a version of that protocol that you will own, and you can make changes to adapt it to how you would do things in your research environment. So that can save you a lot of time and energy. You'll have all the comprehensive details of their approach right there straight away. There are also communities on protocols.io set up as workspaces. So if you use protocols.io, you'll very likely have your own private workspace. But there are publicly available workspaces that you can join. So you can look for workspaces in your community that might be relevant and join those if you want to have a faster view of what people are working on in that space, and the ability to interact and engage with those researchers who are already members of that group as well. And if you're actually wanting to use protocols.io and add your content, we've got some resources online, so you can click that to go. So that if you want to start sharing your protocols, this is our meta approach to the situation, is that we have protocols to help you create a reproducible and discoverable protocol. And in a moment, I mentioned earlier, there was an interdisciplinary example, which really shows why creating and sharing discoverable protocols is such a great thing for research. So this movie just shows you all of the different parts of a protocol that you can add that help it to be more reproducible and discoverable. I'll just let that run. We will share the slides so you'll have access to the links afterwards. Okay, you can include all the reagents, wet lab or equipment, vendor catalog ID, specifics of bioinformatics components, put commands in and things, make them easy to copy out. Can include pictures and videos, so you can have a very media rich protocol in a way that you could never have as part of a materials and methods section in the research article. So this just allows you to fully expand and give all of that comprehensive information needed to repeat a protocol, replicate, or for others just to fully understand exactly what you've done. This is useful for internal training too, though, if you have all the notes and tips and tricks and you need to get a new lab member up and running, you've got a way here to give them a brilliant training resource, essentially, even without publishing it and keeping it internal. Oh, it's running for a long time. Sorry, I didn't realize it. But there we go. So we have guidelines and safety information too. There's all sorts of information that you can add in to the protocols this way. I think I'm going to have to click a few. There we go. And here's the example of how sharing methods independently from research articles is such a fantastic thing to do. So if you're actually publishing them, so on the top left is a tweet from a researcher in Chile who is looking for a protocol for RNA extraction from primary cortical neuron cultures, so from brain cells. After a while, a postdoc from UCSF tweeted a reply pointing to a protocol on protocols.io. And when you look closely at this protocol, it's from a research paper that was published in Gigascience, which was focused on a 3-spine stickleback parasite, so on a fish parasite. But the method detail, that RNA extraction protocol, is in common. The approach would be similar when applied to brain cells as when applied to a fish parasite. However, it's incredibly unlikely that these researchers from Chile would have come to this paper, this published article, as a location of a method that would be useful to them. It's only thanks to the protocol being available separately as an independent research output that we have been able to see this connection, this interdisciplinary connection happen between researchers who are not located close to one another and are not really working on similar things at all, except they apply some of the same methods. So there's lots of benefits here to sharing your protocol as an independent research output. Increase the discoverability, reproducibility, help those research connections, enable reuse, and enhance the value of research. So I seem to have an errant slide number in the middle there of that one. The other thing to note is that if the protocol is published separately from the research article, you can actually have a different author list. So it may be that the protocol can have a first author that's completely different from the first author of the paper. So in this way, you can actually recognize and give credit to the person who created and optimized the method, which may be very different from the people who then applied to, in this instance, the fish parasite. So that's how that credit part really starts to come together, because there's just a more granular way of giving people credit for the things that they've done as a part of a research project. And we've got some lovely examples from some researchers who've made a lot of use of protocols.io, reporting that sharing and publishing detailed protocols has directly led to an increase in the number of collaborations they've established as other researchers have found them through the content they've published on protocols.io. It's also really important to note, before we move on to how protocols.io interacts with publishers, that since we launched protocols.io in 2014, and now with over 16,000 published protocols, we've never seen a case of a publisher saying that because you published protocols on protocols.io, you can't publish your research or method paper in their journal. So publishers don't see the creation and sharing of the protocol on protocols.io as a prior publication. It's much more analogous to posting a preprint. And we've been made aware of we've not been made aware of that ever hurting authors when they've subsequently submitted a manuscript that cites or otherwise includes the link to the author's protocols on protocols.io. So the DOI, when it's put in a manuscript, has not ever harmed an author in having their paper then rejected because they've already made the protocol available. So we would always encourage people to share publicly whenever their protocols are ready internally within the group. So if you're putting it as a part of a research paper, there's no reason really to keep it private until the paper's accepted. But of course, that's author choice, and I'll show you how you've got options to keep private if you want to when you come to time of submitting a manuscript. But from that publishing perspective, the sharing on protocols.io also gives your method additional visibility, as well as enabling you to engage with people who use the method. So there's a way of commenting on protocols. So other users who come and see your published content can comment and ask questions on your method and engage with you. It's also a central place where you can iterate and share corrections and optimizations easily. So they're very dynamic. You can make a new version. If after publication, heaven forbid, you find an error, you can actually just correct that by making a new version, addressing the issue, and making the subsequent versions published too. And they're always linked to one another, and you can see what's changed from one version to the next. So people get guided naturally to newer versions. Doesn't preclude further recognition by publishing it later as part of a peer-reviewed paper. And that is going to take me to the next bullet on the agenda, to show how you can improve the reliability and impact of your research papers by either including a call out to your protocols on protocols.io, or by taking protocols you have but have not really published before and turning those protocols into peer-reviewed methods papers. So first, a very quick overview of just how easy it is to publish or post, not really publish, but obtain a DOI, make publicly available a protocol on protocols.io. At the click of a button, you enter a 6-step process where some information might be required from you. We have to ensure some minimal fields are completed before we can publish. So abstract title, you'll see you would get nudged to complete fields along the way. And then if you're somewhere with a premium license, your protocol will immediately be assigned a DOI and made available. If you don't have the premium license, protocol would enter a screening step, as we do check all protocols before proceeding, simply to weed out spam. We get quite a lot of spam submitted for publication, which we do not want to publish. So we say that the screening process may take up to 2 days. In reality, it's almost always done same day or next morning, outside of weekends and holidays, and you'll get an email like this one that's shown here. You've successfully published a protocol once the protocol is public. If you don't want to make it fully public straight away, there is also this reserved DOI option. That allows you to know what the DOI will be, that you can include it in a manuscript, but will also provide you a private link for editors and reviewers to have access until the manuscript's accepted and you're ready to come back and complete the publishing process. As I said, we would always recommend you just publish from the start, because it's so easy to make new versions and things if you want to make changes later, and it doesn't harm manuscripts consideration at a journal. But the option to reserve and keep it private until you're ready to make it public is there, because we know that some authors do still want to keep things to themselves until they're ready to actually publish with the paper. What does that look like in a published paper? You can do this at lots and lots of journals, but here's an example at PLOS Biology. So it's PLOS Biology paper, and if you go down to the materials and methods, it actually says methods and protocols for the series of different experiments performed are available as a collection on protocols.io. So I should say you can make on protocols.io individual protocols and get DOI for all of them. If you want to gather several into a container collection, so if your research paper has, 5 protocols that you want to make available, you can put them all into one collection and get a DOI for the collection as a whole, and add that in like is shown here. If you click the DOI link, it brings you to protocols.io. And here, this is exactly what happens if after publication an author updates and makes a new version of something in their protocol collection. The viewers will see and note that there's a new version of this protocol, and do you want to see the one that was published at the time of publication or the new version? And so if you click to see the new version, then you will see this up-to-date version, and you can do a compare to see what's changed from one collection version to the next. This is wonderful, though. We call this dynamic permanence, because this does mean that you can always have a permanent DOI that will link to the static version of the method that you published when you published the paper. But you as researchers can come along and further optimize, enhance, and make new versions of your protocols on protocols.io. Research is generally quite a living process. although we have these static final outputs of research papers, the reality is that things are often changing and continue to change after publication. So it's helpful to be able to make those versions on protocols.io. We in 2001 we launched with PLOS One a partnership. They created a new article type called Lab Protocols, which requires that the methods be available on protocols.io as a part of the article, and allows authors to publish their methods. The article and protocol are always bidirectionally linked like this, so you can jump from one to the other, and the materials and methods has that link as well. And just to clarify, I'll just play that, leave that going as well, because it shows a bit how that works, that link between the two. If you are interested in getting protocols peer reviewed and published as a protocol article, you don't have to publish with PLOS One. There are many other journals specialized in publishing methods, techniques, and protocols, and you know your fields and you know your audiences and you know the appropriate journals. PLOS One is a very broad journal, and one of the reasons we were excited is that the way they defined the scope is that they're not expecting new experimental results. They're welcoming to new protocols that might be extensions of something that's already been reported. And the idea is that if you publish already a method, or someone else did, but your work has been to troubleshoot or optimize it for some new conditions or some other example, this work of optimization or tweaking can be recognized, and sometimes that's not insignificant. So this ensures the researchers who develop the methods can get credit. It might be that a student spends a long time, even years, developing and optimizing the method, but doesn't get the opportunity to apply the method in generating novel research results. And this means that they can get credit for their efforts. So you see, when you look at a protocol on protocols.io, there's a peer review options, and right now that just links to these lab protocols on PLOS One and just information about how to submit to them. We will be expanding that soon to have other journals appear in the drop down, so there will be other options. They may not have the exact requirement to have a protocol on protocols.io, but it will be other good journals where you can come along and see what options are for submitting protocols in the context of those research articles, those journals. But for these lab protocols in PLOS One, we've had some lovely feedback from authors that I'm showing here. So Monica at the top notes that because her wastewater protocol achieved mass media attention, even featuring in a New York Times article, it made her famous in the small Latin American country where she is from and where she is a researcher. The next up is Jacopo, who published actually that first lab protocol that I showed you just before. And he was so excited about it. I am going to show actually an excerpt of an interview with him in a minute, because he really illustrates nicely the benefits that can come to your career from sharing protocols this way and publishing them. Third example here, there is Simon as well. This was his first paper as a senior author, which is also very meaningful for him and his career in just becoming established. And so I said here is more from Jacopo. We've made some spotlight videos with several of these authors about the lab protocols they've published. I'm going to show a clip from Jacopo where he talks specifically about the impact on his career and things. Hopefully the audio should come through. Ping me if it doesn't.
Hindsight, now that you've started the postdoc, when you look back in terms of the significance of the lab protocol for your career development, and just looking back, you know, hopefully you're not regretting doing this. Like, how do you feel it fit into your PhD and into the postdoc transition and the reception of the lab protocol paper from your perspective?
I'm extremely proud of it. One of the things I'm really happy about is that, of course, it aided me in the completion of my PhD and me getting a PhD. It's one of the things that, in my specific case, my PhD reviewers were really happy about and were really impressed by. So that's a point of honor for myself. But at the same time, I'm really happy of having it done for my own personal PhD, because it sort of gave a methodological section to it while especially in anthropology is usually research project centered. So a context, a time period, a culture, being able to also develop a method and including a more technical aspect to it, I thought it complemented that really well. And although my PhD was specific to a time period and a region, I managed to add this methodological aspect that sort of went past those boundaries. Another really good thing that I think this protocol has done for my career is the recognition it gave me. As Lenny, you were saying, at first it kind of blew up. Many people started following along and were interested and got in touch with me. I was lucky enough to have been invited to lectures and practical sessions at various universities. And for just a standard, quite niche archaeological method, I think the article right now, after a year, has 4 citations in it, and I've heard of people that are putting together the manuscripts and they've been using it as well, and that's something that I'm very proud of, and I think it has helped my career quite a lot.
Yeah, so as you can see, Jacopo, that has been very, very significant for him. And he was really excited on the platform formerly known as Twitter at the time. He put a lot of excited tweets up about the publication of that first ever lab protocol paper. But it really is nice to hear about all of the subsequent invitations and opportunities that came for him as a result of sharing this method this way. I need to skip through. There we go. And at this point, we've now reached out to many publishers because there's a push for reproducibility. There's well over 500 journals. Some are open access, some are subscription journals that encourage their authors in the submission guidelines to include in their manuscripts a link to the detailed protocols on protocols.io. Of course, now that we've also been acquired by Springer Nature, they alone have thousands of journals, and we're working as fast as we can to try and make sure that protocols.io are mentioned and encouraged in as many of those as possible as well. And funders starting to want this more. They ask for data management plans, but they're also asking for information about how methods will be made available in a comprehensive way. And some are working much more closely with their researchers to really require the sharing of protocols on protocols.io. And as I said, we've never had an issue with authors not being able to publish a paper because they've made their protocol available already. So in fact, not only do journals not see a conflict with that, they're often actively encouraging use of the platform because they realize that the reliability and reproducibility of the manuscripts they publish will be enhanced if the authors have placed comprehensive methods details on protocols.io. And I mentioned the business model. These are just a handful of the institutions that have signed up for licenses at this point in time. There are a few others. There's a way to have a look to see if your institution does have that access, or if you're interested in trying to advocate for that access at your institution, feel free to email me, follow up. These are just some lovely examples of papers that have been published, and the journals or authors promoting deposition of the detailed protocols on protocols.io. So this is the kind of modular publishing embracing open research that we start to see more and more. The paper is the centerpiece, it's got the story, but you also have maybe data in NCBI, OSF, or other repository, code on GitHub, and more we see the methods are coming onto repositories too. So this allows for the distinct author lists for each research output and for credit to be given and received for each research output also. So we're definitely seeing trend in scholarly publishing to move away from vague method sections to more rigorous reproducible method reporting. So yeah, these are just lovely to see when you watch in Twitter or other places, this kind of thing happening. And I'm almost to the end, but there's just a few last things to say. Finally, just to note that protocols all have their own DOI and citation. So in the same way that you get a citation or a DOI link for a research article, you can also have those for a protocol that you make use of, either your own or anyone else's. And it's very easy to download from protocols.io and import them into reference management software like whatever, Mendeley, and others that you might use. So whenever appropriate, you can then cite both method and maybe research article that comes that the method came from, if it's appropriate, depending on the context of when you're referencing that prior work. But yeah, there's a little button to the right under the metadata of protocol where you can download the citation and pop it into your reference software. I showed at the start it's really easy to look for methods on protocols.io that have been published by others. The same goes for your protocols then, if you've made them available. By making them available as published outputs, others can run them, add comments, but make their own fork versions too, where they can adapt the protocol and make their own changes. Maybe they're working on a different species than you, or using a different piece of equipment or different cell type. We've then got lots of options on protocols.io that allow you to monitor and track all sorts of metrics, like I've got here shown on the left, accesses, downloads, bookmarks, exports, etc., comments on a protocol, and see how people have been interacting with your protocol. We also have a way to see what forks have been made. Sometimes there might be a lot of private ones, and you won't be able to see the private ones, but you will know the number. But there might be public forks too, where either the authors themselves or other people have come along and made a version of that protocol and subsequently also published the version that they forked. And if you kind of open it all out, you can see those and see what's happened with different forks and different versions. That's a really positive thing if you want to demonstrate the value and reuse of your methods, if they're important methods that you're working with and creating. Second to last thing I'm going to mention before I stop is that although we're all very familiar with supplementary files and documents in papers, and I know in some research disciplines they really still suggest putting methods, like in chemistry they suggest strongly that you place methods as supporting information files. However, there has been a strong push for a number of years now to move away from supplements by using repositories instead. One main reason being they're just not findable, discoverable in the same way. They're also not archived as stringently as the research articles themselves. So the content is not as easy to interact with, and if it's PDFs, etc., it's much harder to kind of search for and discover content that way. I won't go into more detail about that, but there's a really good article in The Scientist about it that you'll have the link to when we send you the slides. And finally, now this is the real finally, just to reiterate all of the various different but equally important benefits of sharing and publishing your methods on protocols.io, and how this can be beneficial both to your immediate collaborators, but also to others who might want access of the details of your methods, also to you, because sometimes you want the details of how you did something previously, but also as a means, mechanism of being able to receive credit for your research methods. That's a bit of a whistle-stop run through, but I will now move on. I can take some questions if anybody has. You can either pop them, I can see a couple in chat already, pop them in the chat or in the Q&A. So JK asks, is this a way to make data available? You can make data available through protocols.io. It is not a platform that has been created for that purpose. But you can add attachments to protocols. You could add attachment to one and make it get a DOI for it. It would be available. We're not really a data repository. There are some size limits on files that you can share. But obviously, if it's a small data set, you could put it in within the protocol itself. But ideally, you'd be using an appropriate repository for data, where this is clearly a location for step-by-step method sharing. So yeah, probably better to use something more general if it's general data that doesn't have a particular format that it has to adhere to, depends on the kind of subject area. If it's just general, there are things like Dryad or Figshare or OSF where you can make data available. hopefully that answers your question. And then Valerie, I implemented a genome editing protocol, drawing inspiration from several published strategies. The combination of 4 different sources constitutes the body of this protocol, which I adapted to the needs of our laboratory. Am I authorized to publish my protocol, even if it is inspired by several other articles? Wow, that sounds amazing. First of all, that you've managed to pull from 4 different sources to generate the protocol. Yes, you are allowed to publish it. It would be great though if you give attribution to the published strategies that you used as a source to create the protocol that you have created. So there is a way to include citations in a protocol. You could put it as before you start, note that whatever inspiration or just different sources were used and adapted to generate this. There's lots of places where you could put that in. Hopefully you're not kind of copying images or things, because if they've been published in journals, some might be subject to copyright. So you just need to be careful about that. But there's no otherwise reason that you can't go ahead and publish with attribution. In the same way, we draw from already published research papers all the time to come up with novel approaches and ways to try and probe research questions. You would just cite the kind of background of how you got to where you are. So it's completely fine to do it that way. Great question though. I'm curious to see the protocol. Were they already published on protocols.io or were they in research articles? You're welcome. I'm gonna stop the recording now. I won't disappear just yet.